Well, Korea's close neighbor Japan is no stranger to strong quakes and tsunamis. Such natural disasters were not much of a concern on this side of the East Sea. But that perception is changing with a major tremor rattling the nation for the second year in a row. Lee Jung-yeon has the full story.
South Korea was once again hit by an earthquake above magnitude 5. The tremors from the magnitude 5.4 earthquake were felt as far as Seoul, 300 kilometers away from the epicenter in Pohang. The earthquake in Pohang comes around a year after the magnitude 5.8 quake that hit Gyeongju last year, and amid growing concerns that South Korea may no longer be an earthquake safe zone. Here's what the expert has to say.
When we look at the earthquake patterns recorded throughout South Korea's history, quakes have occurred everywhere on the peninsula. They aren't limited to certain areas, so we need to prepare for the possibility of the whole country being prone to big earthquakes and take necessary precautions.
The expert explains that Pohang, where Wednesday's earthquake hit, is situated along what is called an active fault, a fault that has seen seismic activity during the last 10,000 years.
Through this earthquake, the fact that the fault is active is now undisputable. An active fault is always prone to earthquakes, so we must keep a close watch on the region.
More than 40 aftershocks have occurred so far since the main tremor, and although it had a lower magnitude than last year's quake, the Pohang quake has actually caused more damage. The main difference is that the depth of last year's Gyeongju earthquake was between 11 and 16 kilometers, and its epicenter was in a less populated area near the reservoir. But Wednesday's quake was just 9 kilometers below the city in Pohang. Experts say that for now, earthquakes are nearly impossible to predict, but scientists are trying to improve earthquake prediction technology and to come up with more diverse ways to warn the public so as to minimize fatalities. Lee Jung-yeon, Arirang News.
Iran is currently under intense scrutiny for funding global terror, developing nuclear weapons, and illegally testing intercontinental missiles. But that hasn't stopped one European country from doing business with them. That's right, German lawmakers are actually promoting business ties and trade with Iran, the Islamic regime.
Right now, the 5th annual Banking and Business Forum Iran-Europe is running at full swing in Frankfurt, Germany. As we speak, Iranian businesses with suspected ties to the anti-Israel regime are meeting with an array of German ministers and party members, all for promoting trade between the two countries. The economic minister of Germany's Green Party has also apparently given this merger his stamp of approval. He's scheduled to publicly speak at the event. Israel's ministry in Berlin has obviously slammed the disturbing relationship, saying Iran should be the focus of severe nuclear monitoring, given the international community's lack of belief in its intentions. Iran is one of the primary abusers of human rights. Given this, it's possible to understand our dissatisfaction from this forum and cooperation by European bodies. It's important to note here that just a few weeks ago, journalists uncovered 40 attempts from Iran to gain illegal materials for nuclear weapons, all of which took place in Germany. Germany's intelligence agencies have all but confirmed Iran's quest for nuclear power as well. But given Iran's funding of global terror and its specific targeting of the state of Israel, it's unclear why any sector of German society would embrace such open ties with the Islamic regime.
کمی حادثه رخ داد ما از پشت سر آمدم که هیچ کس نیست و پلیس ها ویا میرسه 6 نفر پلیس و 4 نفر ملکی تلف شده بود.
The President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
The fundamental question of our time is, whether the West has the will to survive.
This is an historic moment from which there can be no turning.
There's growing concern over Chinese surveillance cameras being used throughout the U.S., and including military bases and police departments. RT America's Natasha Sweet takes a look into the specifics and why there are mixed reactions to the technology.
Well, it's become the world's largest manufacturer of surveillance camera. The only thing is, 42% of the company, Hengzhu Hikvision, is owned by the Chinese government. And for some, having these cameras on military bases and in the hands of police departments is alarming. Well, these surveillance cameras are being used throughout the globe, both high and low. They're tracking French airports and international ports in Ireland, Iran, and Brazil. And here in the U.S., the Memphis Police Department has been using them since 2007. Cameras were installed at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan. Others were installed at Fort Leonard Wood, an Army base in Missouri. In order to obtain those military accounts, Hikvision says it had to reveal its technology could detect fast motion. Their cameras being able to stream 30 frames per second did the trick. But Hikvision's ties to the Chinese government recently raised flags with the Department of Homeland Security. The chairwoman of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission said the fact that it's at a U.S. military installation and was in a very sensitive U.S. embassy is stunning. But Hikvision maintains it cannot in any way access and control the content of the video cameras, and that it would be impossible for them to add a backdoor to the cameras as it would damage their business. But it's the vulnerabilities in the surveillance cameras that concern many over whether or not hackers could get access. Additionally, our privacy rights here in the U.S. aren't necessarily reflected in these foreign cameras. Facial recognition and other measures are being installed into these devices, which China's leaders want to implement. And these cameras are also utilizing artificial intelligence for sound and object recognition. And Hikvision is the #1 seller of surveillance cameras in Europe and the second here in the U.S. But what you may not know is these cameras are constantly rebranded without the Hikvision name. In Los Angeles, Natasha Sweet, RT.
A high-ranking South Korean official has warned the U.S. against attacking North Korea. Chu Mi-ai, chairwoman of South Korea's ruling party, says the U.S. must avoid taking military action against the North without Seoul's consent. She stressed the need to find a peaceful solution to the crisis on the Korean peninsula. She was in Washington to meet senior U.S. officials. U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly lashed out at North Korea amid escalating tensions in the region. On Wednesday, Trump once again emphasized that he is not taking any option, including the use of force, off the table vis-a-vis Pyongyang.
I made clear that we will not allow this twisted dictatorship to hold the world hostage to nuclear blackmail. I discussed with the United States and South Korean military leaders both military options and readiness to respond to North Korean provocation.
Trump made the remarks in a televised statement a day after returning from his 12-day trip to Asia. He added that Chinese leader Xi Jinping pledged to use Beijing's economic leverage over Pyongyang to achieve denuclearization in North Korea. Tensions have steadily increased between the U.S. and the North over the past months. Washington has deployed advanced missile batteries in South Korea, which has angered Pyongyang and Beijing. North Korea has conducted a series of nuclear tests, which it says are designed to thwart U.S. plots against the East Asian country. Well, going back to our previous story dealing with Japan and U.S. and joint naval exercises, we're going to cross over to California, joined by political commentator Mr. Alexander Azad-Gan. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, what do you make of this by Washington? We see that more and more involved in exercises near North Korea. Does Washington actually want a war with Pyongyang?
I don't believe so. I believe these are very reckless and provocative saber rattling by Mr. Trump. Today, as you're aware, he held that conference sort of hailing himself, congratulating himself when it comes to foreign policy. And in all honesty, he hasn't achieved anything except to trigger the anger and the suspicion and the paranoia of leaders such as the North Korean leader. This, in my opinion, these we can trace back these rounds of tension between U.S. and North Korea when U.S. deployed this THAAD anti-ballistic missile defense system in the Korean Peninsula. And not too long ago, as a matter of fact, from a few days ago, during Mr. Trump's trip to East Asia, we heard Prime Minister Abe's the remarkable and the supportive the gesture toward Mr. Trump. And Mr. Trump went ahead and presented this as a victory for his new interventionist policy around the world. But to me, if you send an aircraft carrier and you have a rare joint exercise, military exercise with not just Japan but also South Korea, that to me is more more dangerous than anything. And I think if you really analyze Mr. Trump's paragraphs and sentences, I smell so much hubris, so much arrogance, and so much imperialistic narcissism. It's beyond hypocrisy, Marzieh. Again, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's own controversial military sympathizing background doesn't exactly help in this situation. We have a very dark history between Japan and the Korean Peninsula, and when you have a militaristic prime minister such as Mr. Shinzo Abe, this symbolically doesn't help the situation. We have to keep in mind that the South Koreans during the U.S.-Korea War between 1950 and 1953, the South Koreans lost over 500,000 people. The North Koreans were over 200,000 people, and the Chinese was around 400,000 people. U.S. only lost 36,000 people, but that was their first loss in Asia at that time, followed a decade later in Vietnam. So we are talking huge numbers and huge emotional attachment to this issue. It's not just some geopolitical game or a flexing of muscles.
All right, and it seems, Mr. Azad Gun, if we look at the situation, of course, we know that North Korea has nuclear weapons. Again, the question would be, why would the United States want to engage in an entity like that at this point in time? Wouldn't it make more sense to actually engage in talks? Is this something that Trump is taking on himself, you think? Or no, it's across the board, this very aggressive policy that the U.S. wants to implement against Pyongyang?
I think Mr. Trump and the leadership cadre in Washington, especially at the executive branch, sees this as some kind of a verbal and military, war of wars between themselves and the Chinese. The Chinese are integral in this whole equation, and as you're aware, the North Korean economy has been booming in the past year. As a matter of fact, it has the growth has been 17%. This has been unprecedented for decades. So I think our colleagues in Washington are sending a clear message to China to somewhat stop supporting the North Korean economy. This is essentially a huge battle between U.S. and China, and it's a very reckless one because, as you said, we are talking about a nuclear power here. But like many other issues and many other the war of wars, there's a political solution to this. So what I'm seeing right now are the powers to be, not just U.S. and China, but also Russia, sort of positioning themselves over a grand bargain over North Korea. And North Korea sees this as an existential threat to its survival. It doesn't want to be sacrificed in between the talks and negotiations and settlements between these three powers.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us, out of California, Mr. Alexander Azad Gun, Political.
Time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France. And I'm joined on the set, as always, by Florence Villeneuve.
Hi, Jeannie.
Hi, Flo. Now, in the wake of the recent national support we saw in Australia for gay rights, today you're going to focus on LGBT rights here in France, where after intense protests, same-sex marriage and adoption were legalized in this country in 2013.
On May 18th, 2013, France became the 13th country worldwide to allow homosexual couples to marry. This mariage pour tous, marriage for everyone as it was known, this law was spearheaded by the justice minister at the time, Christiane Taubira. You can see her here. It's often called the Loi Taubira, in fact, and it was hailed by left-wing voters as a major step forward towards equality.
But that law also left France very deeply divided.
Indeed, because hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets in defense of traditional values. They actually tried to stop the law from going forward. There were several massive demonstrations across France. Now, these were mainly Catholic protesters, and they joined forces under the banner of La Manif pour tous, the protest for everyone. Their slogan was Un papa, une maman, one father, one mother.
We want a mom and a dad.
Gay people? Those people don't have a brain. They're imposing two fathers, two mothers. It's not fair for kids. We're here to defend the kids, not for ourselves.
Now, despite that strong show of resistance, a majority of French people actually were in favor of legalizing gay marriage, but several key issues still remain unresolved today.
There are some issues that are unresolved. The main sticking point today revolves around something called La PMA. You might have already heard of this mysterious acronym. It's actually our acronym or word du jour. PMA is procréation médicalement assistée, so medically assisted procreation. But what is that? Well, essentially it is several things. It can be artificial insemination, so artificially introducing a sperm, so donated sperm or not, into a woman's uterus. And it can also be IVF, so in vitro fertilization, where an egg, donated or not, is combined with sperm, donated or not, outside of the body. The fertilized egg is then transferred into the woman's uterus. So those are the two things that PMA is. And currently, PMA, so medically assisted procreation, is legal only for heterosexual couples who are having a hard time conceiving. Now, in 2014, it was about 3% of babies born who were born thanks to PMA. So we're talking about 25,000 babies, 1 out of every 32 newborn babies.
Now, when it comes to lesbian couples or single women, they're actually forced to travel to other European countries where this PMA is legal.
Let's take a look at a map, actually. You'll see that it's legal for lesbians and single women in several other European countries. Denmark, for instance, is a popular destination, as are neighboring Spain and Belgium. And it's no secret that this is going on. In fact, lawmakers behind marriage equality were hoping to include PMA in the marriage equality law.
In a way, we've legitimized the practice of going to Belgium or Spain for medically assisted procreation, because according to the law, both members of the couple, both women, can be legal parents. And that's good news for those children.
Now, the bad news here is that it's both expensive and complicated, and it often prices out poorer women or poorer couples.
Indeed, and in fact, last June, a national ethics committee backed the idea of opening up medically assisted procreation to all women, gay, straight, single, in a couple. And this is actually a promise that Emmanuel Macron made when he was running for president, and he repeated this in his very first big interview at the Élysée Palace.
À partir du moment où on a accepté pour des femmes vivant en couple.
Once we accepted that women living in a couple can benefit from medically assisted procreation, it's logical that we recognise that right for single women and same-sex couples, given that we recognise that a mother can raise a child on her own and that two women can form a couple.
Au couple de même sexe.
Now, this, of course, opens up a whole new bag of worms. For example, who is going to pay for these procedures?
Well, currently it's Assurance Maladie, so the state-subsidized health insurance that covers this procedure 100% for women so long as they're under 43 years old. The question is, could that be the case for all women if it indeed becomes legal for all women? Now, on top of that, some scientists are sounding the alarm over the possibility of a shortage of sperm, of donated sperm, if indeed this procedure becomes legal for everyone. Now, critics also say that PMA, so this medically assisted procreation, actually is just an open door, paving the way to another controversial acronym, and we'll take a look at this. This is another acronym that comes up a lot when you're talking about gay rights these days, GPA. Now, this is gestation pour autrui, essentially surrogacy.
Now, surrogacy, of course, is still very much illegal here in France. So how are they going to work around that?
Well, it's indeed a source of a lot of emotion here because critics say that it actually leads to the commercialization of human bodies, a baby market, if you will. Now, just like for PMA, gay couples actually go to other EU countries where this procedure is legal, but it's a lot trickier than it is for this medically assisted procreation because up until 2015, France actually refused to recognize children that were born from surrogates abroad. They weren't French citizens, and so it left a lot of these children in legal limbo. Now, France changed that after getting scolded, I guess you could say, by the European Court of Human Rights, but it still is very much a very touchy subject here. President Macron, for instance, says that he's very much against opening any debate on surrogacy, but hardline Catholics, they're worried. They say that actually, if we legalize, medically assisted procreation, it's just an open door to surrogacy. So they've vowed to fight on all fronts. In fact, they want marriage equality to be repealed as well.
Flo, thank you so much for that. Florence Villeminot with this week's